All right. Hi, good morning, guys. I am going to be talking about autism this morning, and this video is going to look a little bit different than some of the other videos we've done. We have a very short, just a few slide presentation, and I then will be kind of shifting through some different websites. So there's going to be a lot of like screen sharing that I'm going to put up on the screen. So you may have to bear with me through some technical stuff. Technical difficulties, not technical stuff. My goal for today is to show some basic resources for anybody out there who has a child who is on the autism spectrum, and some local resources, some online resources, just some basic information for anybody who is curious or maybe concerned, along with just hopefully answering some basic questions. As always, if you have additional questions or additional concerns, or you have a child who has been diagnosed with autism and you're having trouble finding resources, please reach out. Autism is one of those diagnoses that there are resources out there. They can be hard to tap into though. And I'm always happy to help with that. In whatever way that I can. So please keep that in mind, and I will make sure my contact information is shared here at the very end. Let me actually start with a couple of these websites that I want to make sure that I'm sharing with you guys. So let's do my first screen share super awkwardly. That is just fine. No problem. Okay. Hasn't shared yet. Okay, there we go. All right, awesome. So the first one I want to share is this Autismspeaks.org website. This is a national website. And there are some videos on here, which is part of the reason that I didn't build out the presentation, the deck, the PowerPoint much more thoroughly, because this website has some very good videos that you can go. They're also on YouTube. You could probably go to YouTube and search Autism Speaks, and you can pull up some of these videos. I recommend you do it if you have additional questions. This website, as you can tell here on the top, there are just a ton of really good information. We are going to go over what is autism. We're going to go over some of that. Here's a resource guide. We can look at that. This is their work, what they're actively working on, this program, how you can get involved. And then there's a whole section that is in Spanish for my Spanish speakers out there, okay? All right, so I just want to start briefly with just some basic data, basic statistics about autism. It does feel like even in my lifetime, I was born in the mid 80s, that autism is being diagnosed a lot more. And I know, or it's certainly being diagnosed a lot more now as it was, 30, almost 40 years ago. Part of that is there has been a shift in criteria. Part of it is that, they're doing a lot more early childhood intervention strategies. So one of the ways that they test to see if a child may be on the spectrum is it's the ABC questionnaire that I think every parent does. I think it's the 1-year checkup when you go to your pediatrician's office. And so because they're doing these checkups much more regularly, both in what they call the medical home, so in the doctor's office and the pediatrician's office, and at school, more kids are being caught. That net is just wider right now, which is wonderful. In 2020, the CDC indicated that about 1 in 54 kids in the United States are diagnosed I always say on the autism spectrum, but with an autism spectrum disorder, 1 in 34 boys and 1 in 144 girls. I find that super interesting, simply because I haven't read all of the research that this is based on. And so I don't know if autism just presents differently in young girls as opposed to young boys. There could be a wide variety of reasons that may be the case. Most children are still being diagnosed after the age of 4, even though autism can be really reliably diagnosed as early as 2. And we're going to talk about that here in just a second when we talk about some of the larger symptom clusters is what they refer to it as, with some of the larger the areas of concern, like the red flags that pediatricians see in young kids that encourages them, that makes them consider checking and doing additional testing. Okay, so 31% of children with ASD, which is Autism Spectrum Disorder, have an intellectual disability. That's having an IQ lower than 70. 70 is, I think, considered low average. I think 100 is average. 25% are in the borderline range, 71 to 85, and 44% will have IQ scores in the average to above average range. So IQ scores are also one of those super interesting, just kind of, I consider it a relic of past days because there are definitely cultural biases in IQ testing that haven't been addressed, right? Both racially and based on class. So people in lower economic strata, so people who don't have as much money as others, sometimes test lower, but it's not because the child who's testing isn't intelligent. It's the way the questions are asked, and it's the kinds of questions that are being asked. So IQ testing, always take it with a bit of a grain of salt, just because they haven't worked out all of that stuff yet. But the thing to take away from this statistic is just because a child is diagnosed with autism on the autism spectrum, does not mean that like academically and intellectually that they are delayed. We have this image of autism as it's always a severe it's always the low functioning autistic individuals who we end up seeing, right? Every movie you've ever seen that has a child with autism who's like helping, solve a crime or whatever, and who can't communicate, just doesn't communicate at all, right? Never talks, right? Or has repetitive behaviors that keep them from doing and engaging in life at all. Well, that is certainly some children on the spectrum. It is not all children and adults on the spectrum, not by a long shot. So just have that in mind. It affects all ethnic and socioeconomic groups. Minority groups tend to be diagnosed later and less often. So, have that in mind. If you are concerned about your child, maybe they're on the spectrum, you want to make sure that you're advocating for your child and you're asking for that testing if you feel like it's necessary. Okay. What causes autism? I don't know how many of you guys have heard of the whole like refrigerator mom nonsense that came out in the 1950s. Basically, psychologists back then thought that children developed autism because their moms didn't love them, which is ridiculous. Like that would cause like an attachment setup or like a trauma related situation, not autism. It does seem to have a genetic component. Parents who are older, there seems to be a component, like there seems to be a correlation, not causation. So if you are a 39-year-old woman and you are having a child, that does not mean your child is going to have autism. It just means that mothers who are older who are giving birth may be more likely to have a child later diagnosed with autism spectrum on the autism spectrum, but that does not mean that your age caused that. It is one factor. Children, so if you already have a child who's on the spectrum, 2 to 18% chance of having a second child. I think it's a higher chance if both of them are like, if you have another boy, because boys, like I pointed out earlier, are like, what did it say? Like 4 times more likely. And studies have shown that among identical twins, this is how they tend to figure out this genetic stuff with identical twins, because they have the same DNA. If one child has autism, the other will be affected. This number is wild, 36 to 95% of the time. That's, what is that, a third to most of them? Like, that's a crazy stat. Like, what that tells me is that we don't really know, right? And that the data is not super consistent, so there's still more work to be done here. And in non-identical twins, if one child has autism, the other is affected about 31% of the time, which is about a third. And just, for posterity, over the last 2 decades, extensive research has asked whether there's any link between childhood vaccinations and autism. The results of this research are clear: vaccines do not cause autism. And I fully respect that some of you out there may disagree with that. And I'm not going to sit and argue for one point or the other. I'm not a medical professional. I did not go and do this research. I'm not in the research field, specifically testing this hypothesis. If that is something you believe and you would like to learn more about it, or something you're concerned about and you would like to learn more about it, I'm sure I can find some articles and some like medical data that I can share with you so that you can read through it. As far as interventions, intervention is like a fancy word for just anything that somebody does to try to make a situation better, right? So like if you guys call me and are like, hey, by the way, I would like help filling out this application, and then I help you, that's an intervention, right? So interventions are not always these big, crazy, like complicated setups. Sometimes it's as simple as that. But early interventions for children on the spectrum are super, super important. They can improve learning, communication, and social skills, as well as underlying brain development. We know that kids who are exposed to like more positive, I don't want to use positive, I don't know why I went with that word. The more children are exposed to, kind of the more neurons are developed when they're little. And if we have a child who is, let's say, 2 years old and they're not speaking yet, it is vital to get them in for early childhood intervention into speech therapy, so that they can start learning the skills, right? Because like with speech development in particular, there's a window where kids have to learn basic sounds. And if those basic sounds are not learned, and it's like 6 or 7, right? It's not like by 18 months old. But if they're not learning those sounds by then, they may never learn full language. And I have other information and stuff there if people are interested in learning more about that. Many children affected by autism benefit from speech therapy. Occupational therapy always sounds like, hey, I'm going to go get a job. But occupational therapy is stuff like, so it's social skills, right? So it's how do you play a game and take turns? That's something that is taught in occupational therapy. Kids who have no conflict management skills, right? Sometimes could benefit from occupational therapy. Occupational therapy will use sensory therapy too, right? We'll do like the balls with like the spikes on them, like the that's, you know what I mean? Like not like metal spikes, but like the rubber spikes. There's something about that allows the children to get some sensory intake into their body. So occupational therapists will use stuff like that as well. Developmental regression or loss of skills, such as language and social interest, affect about 1 in 5 children who will go on to be diagnosed with autism, and usually occurs between the ages of 1 and 3. Right. So if you have a child who is learning to talk, right, who's 12 months old, has a couple of words, 18 months old, they've got some words, they're up and they're moving, and then they hit 2 and they just kind of stop. Right. They don't want to be held. They don't want to make eye contact anymore. They had, 30 words and now they have like no words. Right. Like that's like you need to take them in. Like you need to schedule an additional appointment and you need to get in as soon as possible. Okay. So that it can be addressed, right? Because early interventions, they work really, really well with kids. And speech therapy sounds crazy because it's like, hey, can you say ball? Okay, say ball, say ball. And as a parent, you're like, why am I paying for this? Like, I can do this. And yes and no, right? You totally can, because the speech therapist and occupational and physical therapist are all going to teach you the skills so that you can continue practicing with kids, with your child. Also, parents who have not been trained, like I have not been trained as a speech therapist. So if my kids needed a speech therapist, I would get one, simply because there may be another way, right? Like speech therapists are experts. This is what they do. They have a wide range of skills and strategies to help children learn different sounds and words and stuff like that, that we as kind of the non-experts in that field can take from them and can use moving forward with our kids. Okay. Other, statistics here. I think that the other thing that we always talk about when an individual with autism is like on a TV screen is always this one right here, this self-injurious behaviors, right? We always talk about, they're going to headbang and they rock and they do all this stuff. And yes, that is common. 28% of 8-year-olds who are on the autism spectrum do have some of these behaviors. What that does mean is that's 1 in 4, right? So that means that 72% do not, which I think is a benefit here. And I think that if you're working with an occupational therapist, they can help you figure out better strategies or different strategies to help manage some of those behaviors as needed. Okay. This page has a bunch of additional information, including autism in adulthood. Just because a child is diagnosed with autism does not mean that they are not going to go on to live a full and fulfilling life, a wonderful life. I went to college with a woman who was on the spectrum. I have had friends who have been on the spectrum as an adult, and I would not have known if they hadn't shared. So it is not the kind of diagnosis that ends anything, right? It is important to have this information so that you can learn from it, but it does not define that child. It is not a holistic thing for that child for the rest of their lives, more than likely. So I want to do symptoms just really quickly. I want to do this, and then I'm going to switch over to another page. And then I want to go through the short deck that Maria was kind enough to put together for us. Okay, so what are the symptoms of autism, right? We've talked a whole lot about, like, I've thrown out a bunch of stats, a bunch of numbers at you guys. Everybody in the room probably has an idea when I say we're talking about autism. What does that mean to you? Everybody has a view. And that is okay. It's perfectly okay to have an expectation, have a viewpoint, have a thought about that. The core symptoms of autism there are two areas. Number one, social communication challenges and restricted repetitive behaviors. So social communication challenges, this is, I think that the traditional example is having trouble reading body language, right? So humans, we all do this, whether you realize it or not. We have many ways of communicating with people around us. We have we have verbal communication, which is what I'm doing right now. We're having a conversation. I'm talking, you're listening. This is all very verbal. Like, that part is verbal. Then there is body language, right? So there is I tend to talk a lot with my hands, which for some people is super frustrating. And I have a hearing disability. And so I've had people ask me if I know ASL, American Sign Language. And that's not why. I don't know why I do it. I think I just tend to punctuate everything with it. And that's how it is. I think it's also a way to manage my own anxiety and having conversations in front of groups of people, but that is a different conversation for a different day. But I am leaning forward, I don't even know that people can tell, but I'm certainly not sitting back having this kind of conversation with you, but I'm sitting up. I'm trying to be engaged. I'm engaging with the material. I'm hoping that as you're watching this video, you feel as though I am taking this seriously. I'm trying to make eye contact. That's super weird on Zoom, right? But eye contact is a big thing in American cultures. In America, right, we tend to, if you're showing respect, you're looking them in the eye. If you're looking away, it tends to be like a sign that you're lying, even though it's not always the case. Tone of voice, right? I'm not yelling. I'm not whispering. I am talking a mile a minute, but that's my baseline. I tend to talk a mile a minute. And I'm smiling. I am, relatively relaxed. I'm trying to be engaging and trying to build rapport, right? All of these things they're all a way of communication. They're all communication. Hopefully it sets people at ease, right? It's how, with kids, right? We're encouraged to be on their level, right? So the kid's in trouble, kneel down, you sit down next to them. Hey, what's going on? Right? Instead of towering over them, especially if you're really tall, right? Getting down to their height and being able to be in their space is super helpful. And facial expressions, right? Sad, happy, sad, mad. I wish my son was here. He does a better job than I do. But children who are on the spectrum, they struggle with the nonverbals, right? All of that stuff, tone of voice, body language, how you're sitting, if you're sitting back, if you're sitting up, if you're making eye contact, right? They are in facial expressions. They have trouble with that. They don't tend to understand those nonverbal cues as well as some people do, right? Because there are plenty of people in the world who don't understand nonverbal cues who are not on the spectrum. And restricted repetitive behaviors, rocking, head banging, those are kind of the first two examples that come to mind. But there are others. I'm absolutely sure I'm having a hard time right now in this moment coming up with an example. But it could be, anything from they need to, an individual who's on the spectrum needs to make sure that their clothing is laid out in exactly the same way every single day, or they have to wear a striped shirt with a blue jacket every day, no matter how hot it is, right? That can also be an example of that. Symptoms or autism they tend to begin in early childhood, even though they may go unrecognized. They persist. They're there, right? It's something that it is a different individuals who are on the spectrum. Their brains are wired a little bit differently. They're not wired wrong. They're just wired a little differently. And the kind of the most empowering thing that can help is helping them navigate through that and helping the people who are in their lives navigate through that too. And by navigate that, I mean like what, like my old roommate who was on the spectrum, right? The first thing she did when she signed her lease with us was tell us. She was like, hi, I've been diagnosed with Asperger's, which is on the spectrum, but it's no longer called Asperger's. And I was like, oh, like, what does that mean? Like, what does that look like for you? Because it's different for everybody. And she told us, she was like, I don't understand facial expressions. Like, so if I've done something to upset you, or if you are mad at me, like, could you please just tell me? And like that worked really well for her. Like she was very successful with that mentality of I'm just going to be upfront about what my needs are. And I'm going to let the people around me know so that we can all have a better and clearer understanding of what her needs were. And they interfere with daily living, right? Whether that is not understanding emotions or like not understanding nonverbal communication, or, maybe all their striped shirts are in the laundry that day. It impacts how these children, these adults, it can greatly impact their day in a wide variety of ways. I don't want to sit here and try to make a guess on how, because it impacts, I think, everybody differently. So they use a checklist, providers use a checklist of criteria in those two categories, the social communication challenges and the restricted repetitive behaviors. And then there's a severity scale. If you go to this website, there are hyperlinks here, so you can totally check into that as well. And then the third piece here that it looks like isn't always associated, but is frequently associated, is sensory issues. I've already used that phrase, and I don't think I like defined it well enough. But sensory issues are being over or under sensitive to lights, sounds, touch, taste, smell, pain, and other stimuli. So the kids who cannot eat bread, hate the way it tastes, hate the way it feels in their mouth. The kids who need to have a red light all the time, right? The white lights are too bright for them. The kids who it's loud outside, right? They need to wear headphones. They need to wear headphones in order to manage the sound coming in so that it's not overwhelming for them. And it looks like it's associated with some additional physical and mental health conditions. I strongly encourage you to go in and take a look at that. Some just additional examples. I actually hit this pretty on the head for not having read through this entire page. Here, down here at the bottom, are some related posts and resources. So 100-day toolkit for young kids, 100-day toolkit for school-age children, and is it autism? If so, what next? A guide for adults. Like I said, this website has a ton of additional material and resources. I strongly encourage anybody to check that out. And the next website that I definitely wanted to go over with you guys is the Autism Society, TexasAutismSociety.org. This is a local-ish, it's at least in the state of Texas, series of resources. And there are just some really cool stuff. So Autism Society provides free information and referral services for all ages and stages. So if you have a loved one who is dealing with autism in any way, shape, or form, right, like this may be a good website to check it out and kind of get a sense of what referrals may exist. Employment help for adults who have been diagnosed with autism. By the way, I don't like saying autistic adults or like depressed adult because it's something that's part of you, but it's not your only characteristic. Like I happen to be hearing impaired. I'm gonna have to say deaf with like a lowercase d, because the capital D is there's a culture around that as well. But I mean, I don't like go like it's just the way I talk. Sorry if that's frustrating. Okay, here is some. I think this is Aut Fest Texas 2020 is hitting the road. It's a film festival. Looks like it will be virtual this year. Just a ton of resources here, including some recreation stuff and advocacy. So, you know, they work with other local groups to celebrate families and draw attention to the challenges that families who are dealing with somebody with autism is experiencing. Education to make sure that we are continuing to educate people about autism and the many different interventions. Autism has been a bit of a hot topic the last 20 years. And so there's been a lot of work. And because of that work and that research, there have been a lot of really good programs that have come out of it. You know, recreation. So here's some outdoor outings and activities for kids and adults who have been diagnosed on the spectrum. And here is some like just emotional support for parents who have a child who's been diagnosed with autism. It looks like through online, through regional and statewide. So regional would be like right here in the Austin area, statewide, obviously the entire state. But like on Facebook or Meetup and just some face-to-face gatherings with other parents who are going through it, because you're not alone. You do not have to reinvent the wheel here. There are many, many families out there also dealing with this. And sometimes it can be just lovely to sit down and just go, oh my gosh, I'm struggling, help me. So I'm just going to go over these the tabs at the top really quickly, and then we'll go over the presentation, which I think we've mostly covered at this point. And we'll call it an end on this video after that. Okay. So the Autism Society, just some basic information. Yeah, just including some latest news. Here's some supports, including this is why I wanted to put this on here, was for the resource guide, the online groups, and the support groups, particularly for families, grandparents, parents, siblings, older siblings of children who have been diagnosed, because older siblings also deal with the stress and the tension of a young child being diagnosed, and the changes, the shifts and the changes that may happen in a family when a major diagnosis happens. How they help. So advocacy, legislative session, they go down to legislature and they advocate on behalf of individuals with autism. Advocacy 101, I think that's like basic, like teaching you how to advocate for your child or for yourself if you have been diagnosed. Position statements, advocacy committee. Here's the education for first responders, seminars across the spectrum, brown bag learning series. I think that's probably just like online trainings. And then if you want to get involved, you can get their newsletter, become a partner. There are a bunch of different areas, including volunteering or, you know, funding if you happen to be sitting on a bunch of money, which is anyone. And here's some upcoming events. Texas Autism Bike Ride and Fun Run, Texas Autism Film Festival. And there's a calendar, and then obviously the donate button, which exists on all these nonprofits. This is just a snippet of what exists out there in the world regarding autism and the resources that are available. You are certainly not bound by that, but it is a place to start, those two websites. And other than that, like I said, I think like ATCIC offers resources for individuals with autism as well. And, you know, state hospitals and stuff, if somebody is particularly severe, if they have severe symptoms and they're older, you know, if you have a child who is like turning 18 soon or is like 17 or 16 and they are like, and they have severe symptoms of autism and have a hard time functioning on their own, like it is worth having conversations about guardianship and about how to support them earlier rather than later, just so that you have your ducks in a row once they turn 18. All of these are things that I am happy to talk more about. It is a complex issue with a complex, what's called etiology. Like we don't really know where it comes from. We don't really know how it gets there. What we know is that there's a wide range of reasons and of risk factors that are found to like be correlated with it. But that like none of them, it's not like, you know, smoking and lung cancer, and like smoking doesn't always cause lung cancer, and not everybody who smokes gets it. Not everybody who has lung cancer has smoked, right? Like there are still other factors involved there. But additional resources, always happy to help you guys look for. And if your child is under the age of 3, and language is one of the first things, right? Language, if your 2-year-old doesn't have any words, that's concerning. They should have words by then. If your 2-year-old isn't walking, that's concerning. They should be walking by then. If you have a 1-year-old who doesn't make eye contact, right? Like that's unexpected, right? Because babies look at faces, right? They're just genetic, they're hardwired to like seek out face patterns. And if they're not doing that, there's a potential problem. It doesn't mean they will absolutely have autism. It just means that there may be cause for concern. Things like that. Okay. All right. So this is the last bit I'm going to go over. I think it's like 4 or 5 slides. I will go through it probably pretty quickly because we've already talked about a lot of these issues. All right. Okay. What is autism? Broad range of conditions. 1 in 54 children, according to the CDC. Core symptoms. There we go. I think that was pulled exactly from the website I showed you guys. And the risk factors: increased risk, decreased risk. So I will say this, prenatal vitamins, including folic acid before and at conception and through pregnancy. So if you find out you're pregnant, you should take prenatal vitamins unless there's a reason not to. And then accessing resources. If your child is under the age of 3, you can get services through your state's early intervention program. Travis County, that is largely run by, oh my gosh, I had it in my head. What was it? I lost it. Wow, that's really sad. I'm going to find it. When I find it, I'm going to drop it in the chat box. I hope I find it by the end of this presentation, by the way. But your pediatrician, your primary care, sometimes a school can send over a referral for an early childhood intervention assessment. This is also true of like speech delays, physical development delays. So like, let's say you had a 12-year-old or a 12-month-old who somehow broke their leg and needed, and like, because of that, took a huge step back and walking, was like then uncomfortable with walking once the leg healed. Right, like physical therapy may be beneficial for them, occupational therapy, sensory stuff. If your child's under the age of 3, you can request an assessment by an early childhood intervention specialist, and they are amazing. And then for children 3 to 21, you can get services through your school district special education office. That is another place to get services. And there's outside, like I said, those 2 websites that I shared. I don't know why I'm doing that. I'm trying to move my chair forward awkwardly right now. I'm sorry. There are also services through your health insurance potentially, and then through some of these local resources, including like ATCIC and the school district. And if for whatever reason the school district isn't offering services, they are legally required to. Have that in mind. And that is, I think, what we have to share today. And once again, this is such a drop in the bucket on the information that's out there regarding autism. And please feel free to ask if you guys have any additional questions. If you know anybody who's diagnosed with it and you would like to, process through that diagnosis, because it can feel a lot, right? Like, I think anytime our kids are diagnosed with anything, it's scary. And when the image you've seen is on TV and it's not a truly inclusive image, like it could be overwhelming, right? Happy to talk about it. Would love to talk more about it with any of you guys, both your emotional processing and also like how, and also just being a voice, like just being an ear, right? Like if you are already working with other providers and you are struggling with like how to make sure your voice is heard and your child's voice is heard, I'm always happy to talk to you guys about that too. Kind of whatever you need in this area. I am not an expert on autism. Most of my background is in childhood development, and so I do have some knowledge on like how autism impacts that. And I've also worked with a ton of kids and a ton of families, and just seen how a single diagnosis, a single child who is struggling, impacts the entire family dynamic. And so making sure that as a family, you're getting support, and as a family, you are getting the space to have your feelings, right? Whether it's, sadness or anger or frustration or whatever it is, and you're able to do that safely. All of that impacts and helps the child who may be struggling with whatever symptom. Okay. I will try to drop my contact information in the description below. Otherwise, you guys should know how to get a hold of me on the website, or not on the website, but via my email or via text. You guys get emails from me at least once a month. But I look forward to hearing your feedback on all of this. And I hope that we are able to come to a beginning of an understanding of how we can all support each other when we have kids who are struggling. All right. Have a wonderful day, and I look forward to seeing you all later.